Greg Mescall here with you for more At Home with USA Water Polo. This week's theme, Community Week. So we're touching on a bunch of different areas in the world of water polo and our favorite sport. And today, Monday, we start off with a referee's role. And we have two people that are excellent to speak to this, part of the USA Water Polo staff. Our national referee coordinator, Tiffany Spiritosanto, and then our national referee manager, Levon Dermendjian. Appreciate both of them joining us here today. Now, a lot of the talks we've had in the past during At Home, Levon's been part of them, have been rules focused, right? And we'll certainly happy to dip into some of that today, but I think more the focus of this talk is about how referees interact with the water polo community, whether it's coaches, athletes, parents, that sort of thing. Because look, and we've talked about this many times, being an official is a difficult job, right? It is a very hard job regardless of the sport. Water polo is a hard sport to officiate. Levon, I'll kind of start with you. When you think about being a water polo referee and kind of how you fit into a water polo game, how do you kind of describe your role to people when you say, you know, I'm a water polo referee, here's what I'm here to do? How do you describe that role?
Thanks, Greg. I think what I start off with is not just a referee who makes the calls regarding the rules, but I think there's a bigger picture that gets lost sometimes, which is that referees are game managers. So we're responsible for other things. We're responsible for the decorum around the pool deck. We're responsible for the safety of the players, obviously, but we're just responsible for a atmosphere for not only the players, but for everyone else involved on the pool deck. So that's number one. There's a bigger picture. And then also just want to make sure that you as a referee are just not only with the rules of the game, but the spirit of the game. So you're going into the game knowing that you want to be a part of the game. You want to know what the offense is trying to do. You want to know what the defense is trying to do, and you want to be a part of that game. And you want to go with the flow of that game. You don't want to be someone that, cuts the flow or is counter to what's going on in that game. So just being a part of it in that way, making sure the players are safe, and then also the spirit of the game and being part of the flow of the game.
That's excellent stuff, Levon. And like any good referee duo, you two came color coordinated today. You both have the red tops on, so I appreciate that. You're ready to go out and officiate right now. Tiffany, just kind of your take on that same question. You probably agree with a lot of what Levon said, but anything that came to mind when you think about that?
A lot of it is people told you. So when I was a young referee, you're always so focused on like at the center position, you're like, is there a foul? Is there not a foul? You're so focused on individual things when you're just starting out because you don't want to miss anything. You don't want to make a mistake. And then as you start to get the game within the lane lines, as they say, right, you start to understand the flow of the game. You start to understand, is that a foul? Is it a contra? Is it, just an ordinary foul, or where the tactical foul may lie? And so you think like, as you're coming up through the ranks or as you're getting better games, you're getting better at these tactical fouls and how you call the game. You are being told like, hey, it's not just inside the lane lines, it's everything, right? You embody everything, the game management from players sitting down on the bench and what the game looks like from the cones being in the right spot. And so I think a lot of it is, it's not when everyone says, you call the right calls. Well, yes, but the whole game management is everything from start to finish, from the moment you walk on the deck, the professionalism that you walk on the deck, you do your site survey, making sure that everything is in place, the clock is working, the horns go off, etc. And so I think that kind of embodies everything. So you may have your game like in between the lane lines and the X's and O's, but it's not just that, it's everything that goes around.
You bring up a great point. Both of you talked about the idea of game management. And I think whether it's water polo or any other sport, there's sometimes a knock on referees that they want to have some sort of additional impact on the game, that they're not just calling what they're seeing and trying to manage the game. Levon, just kind of furthering that thought about game management, we know that the good referees don't want to have any adverse outcome on the game, but you do want to allow the game to occur to the best of its ability. How do you go about achieving that and not leaving anyone with the feeling as if the referee had undue influence on the outcome of the game?
Right. The last bit of your question broke apart a little bit on me, Greg, but I think I got the gist of it. I think the game, as it's progressing, it's becoming more technical, and referees should be making more calls. So I know referees don't necessarily like to be involved in the calls and want to be part of the game and want to make a game deciding call, let's say. So I think especially for younger referees, they want to kind of take a step back and let the players kind of figure out on their own. And that's kind of the mentality that we're trying to get away from, because the game is so much more technical and it's getting to be more technical. So so yes, you have to be involved. We want referees to be more involved, especially when it comes to rewarding the offense and player safety. But at the same time, yeah, you run the risk of having this effect that some may perceive as you wanting to give an unfair advantage to one team or another, which, in all the years that I've been officiating, I don't think I've run into a referee ever who says that I want this particular team to win, or I want, it's just that doesn't happen. But I think as we're asking referees to be more active in the game and making the appropriate calls, I think that's referees have to be aware that there's a fine balancing act between consistent refereeing, so you don't give off that perception to anyone.
Tiffany, let's talk about the relationship between the official and the coach. So coaches will talk a lot to referees. What does that ideally look like to you? How do you want those interactions to go?
I will say this on like a personal note. I've been told by many of my colleagues that I'm a little maybe too nice. Not necessarily like letting them get away with murder, but more or less I'm like too nice. Like I open the door too much is a lot of the feedback that I've been given. However, I feel that those relationships that I have created with just being kind and respectful, and my tone to be kind and respectful, it's a two-way street, right? So even though they may be coming a little bit hotter with what they're saying, as long as it's open and it's dialogue of like, I see what you meant there, and you're hearing them, you're not going to be fitting like a wall, like they're going to be yelling at you and then you yelling back or snapping back. And so I think that with the way that I have handled it has worked for me. Many know that my last name is very prominent. It's very prominent in this world, like in California with my brother-in-laws as well as my husband. And my husband would always say, like when we did ref games together, he'd say, how did you get away with that? Or how were you able to say that? Or how did you even come with that? Like, I don't know. It just verbally comes out of my mouth. So I know that my words are a little bit different of how I talk to them like a real person. And even though it's maybe like a heated thing or not, but sorry, my daughter, I know everyone's watching live. My daughter's tickling my feet right now. She thinks it's really funny. She's sitting on the other side of the computer, so I'm sorry about that. But anyway, so I think with the relationship with like the referees and the coaches, it's met with mutual respect. And I think that starts right when you walk on the deck. And if you talk to one coach, you talk to the other. And I'm not saying have a 5-minute dissertation. I'm not talking about calls or plays or anything like that, but human decency, and just like, hi, how are you, Greg? How are you doing today? How's the weekend going for you? Good luck. Have a good game. Or if there's associate coaches or there's multiple coaches, you may know one but not the other. And I wouldn't assume that just because the one person's older or they're a different gender, that one is the head coach versus the other. And I think that goes a long way when you shake all the adult hands that are sitting in that, or even young coaches, right? So you're going to shake all of their hands. If I'm going to shake one, I'm not going to just shake one person, I'm going to shake all 3 of them that are sitting there, even the stat person, kind of a thing. So for me, it's just creating them all equal and just saying like, hi, how are you? And if they don't know my name, I say my name and good luck in the game. Which one of you is the acting head coach today? And even if I already know the answer, I'm going to ask, because it's not my job to assume those roles. And I think that starts off on a good note when you start the game that way.
Levon, Tiffany talks about a lot of good points there. Every coach has a different personality, style, energy level. In your experience, how key has it been to know these people on some level so that you know how they're acting during the game and then you can react appropriately?
Yeah, I think with many of the coaches we know pretty well and have a good working relationship with them, and they are very passionate, and we know where they stand and we know how they perceive the game and how they're going to approach us. Then we have some coaches who are not so open to having conversation or being personal with us. So we kind of sometimes don't know what we're going to get with some of these coaches. But I think there's 2 types of coaches, and I'm going to build off of a little bit what Tiffany said, is that there's these coaches who are, one is very passionate. They are arguing balls and strikes. They care about the game. And then you have another another group of coaches, unfortunately, that kind of just focus on the referees from the beginning of the game and are pretty disrespectful. And so in that, with both of those cases, we have to take different approaches. And some coaches are known to be always one type. Some coaches are, for the most part, known to be another type. And we as referees need to know how we're going to handle both at any given time.
And now from coaches, we of course have to talk with players and player interaction. And I know it's different at different levels, but Tiffany, as far as how you interact with the players and what you want those conversations to look like when you want to hear from a player, what are some best practices here for athletes and things that coaches can tell their athletes as far as interacting with officials?
I think the line is respect. There are a few times where a center is in there and it's working, and the ball's short, or they didn't work around to the right side, or they make the steal, and the center looks at you like, ugh, and you just want to tell them this is why, right? And it's really hard because they put their head down, they swim the next way. But if that keeps happening possession after possession, they all of a sudden start looking at you like I'm doing everything right. So for me, I think the thing is like respect. I have no issue. Like, right, there's a few times where there's certain players that are, you know, certain instances with this player, I'm like, oh, I wish I could go talk to them right now, but I can't go tell them, hey, like if you did this, you know, if you put your hand down, maybe it's not going to contrafoul every single time. Or if you sealed first, or, you know what I mean? Or anything like that. Or if your team can work the ball around to you, kind of hold aside rather than working towards the ball, or whatever it may be. You know, at the younger players in terms of like the push off, which kind of a thing, you know, the push off to get the ball across the way. So I think for me is I have no issue talking to players if it's done respectfully and it's done at the right time at the stoppage of play. Like I've had some people that are like the contra foul was called and you know, there was a goal scored or something happens and the player looks up, goes, is it me? And you're like, yes or no. And it's like, okay. And then they know right away, but it's like, they're just asking because they want to know, right away. They want to know, was that contra foul called on me? I don't deem that as disrespect. I deem that as right away, like yes or no, like yes, that was on me. Okay, good, I got caught. Or okay, no, it wasn't on me. Thank you, I can do that part again. Or, you know, it wasn't me that was too aggressive or too whatever that particular play may be. I also have no issues if it becomes at a stoppage, not necessarily after a goal. Like if it's like, you know, I'm not gonna have like a lengthy conversation, but hey, real quick, hey, what would you like to see there? Hey, I'd like you to see X, Y, Z, and then you can explain it. It's the back and forth when you give the answer and then it's yeah, but, and then they keep going and then it becomes like an argument or like a conversation, a dissertation. That's not appropriate from a player to a referee. But for me as a referee, I have no issue because that's how they're going to see like how we're seeing the game from up above and how we're seeing the game progress is different. And so I think it's just how you ask, the way you ask, the timing that you ask, and accepting the answer, whether you like the answer or not, saying, okay, thank you, and then going on your way because that's how that game is called, you know, the game that's happening right then.
Levon, both you and Tiffany have officiated high-level games with a lot of emotion and energy, young athletes, professional athletes. Levon, how do you handle dealing with athletes when you know that they're being very emotional, that they're very excited, and kind of understanding where they're at and kind of reacting appropriately? You know, so whether it's a big celebration or they're angry about something, but kind of meeting them at that moment?
And that's a great question, Greg, because I think it's a fine art that we have to deal with, especially when you're talking about, you know, professional athletes at times when you're reffing. You don't want, as a referee, to throw fuel on the fire. You don't want to take a gesture or a remark and make it worse than what it was. And one of the things that we tell referees is that there's other avenues you can take that kind of de-escalate the situation. If need be, don't get me wrong, if the action is bad enough, we have to deal with it immediately and harshly. But I do think as part of game management skills as referees, we have a lot of tools that we can utilize so that we can de-escalate the situation. You know, one of the things I always love to do is I like to, you know, talk to the coach when I get a chance and say, hey, look, I've been noticing that this particular player is, you know, giving me a gesture. I want, you know, the player to stay in the game. So, you know, maybe I'll let the coach handle it as opposed to just, dropping the hammer right away. Another thing I like to do is I like to call on captains at an appropriate stoppage. Let's say timeout or quarter break. I'll call the captains, or I'll call the captain of the team who I believe is, maybe showing disrespect or talking too much about certain calls. And I'll just say, hey, look, this has got to stop, because, I think one of the things that referees know is that it's like a snowball effect, right? When one goes and it keeps going, it gets worse and worse and worse. And if we don't deal with it in one way or another, it's just gonna keep getting worse. And so, I think referees just have to concentrate on the fine art of not being so reactionary and seeing what tools you have available so you can properly mitigate it.
We've hit a lot of the key groups here, of course, coaches, athletes, and now Tiffany, we have to look at fans, right? And depending on the size of the game, there can be some large crowds. Every sport has fans that get on the officials. Tiffany, how do you work with the fans if they want to know what's going on? Are you entertaining explanations? If they're giving you a very hard time, how are you working through that?
I think it depends on the level. I think it depends on the fan itself. For me, the big crowd, the big fans, it's like, that's exciting. Like, that is huge, and someone, just going back real quick, like just to that, so like someone always asks, and when we're recruiting new referees and we're trying, everyone's like, I can't get yelled at. Like, I don't mind doing it, but I just don't want to get yelled at. And it's not necessarily from the coach, it's from the fans. And they don't want to enter. And so very often in my career, even young into my career, I was always asked, like, how do you do that? How can you go out there when the fans are yelling and, it's ball under, when ball under was like the big call, right? Or the younger levels, or they're touching Johnny, or they're doing this. And so I used to just say, like, when I was a young, up and comer, I was like, I just pretend that they're all my mom and my dad yelling at me to clean my room. And I was just a punk kid that was like, yeah, okay, la, la, la. Like, I don't. So for me, it fueled me. And now I kind of like, it's not that you chuckle at it, you kind of just, you hear them, sometimes you don't, it just depends. And sometimes, like, they're watching either the ball or they're watching their kid. And I will say this, sometimes they're seeing something because they're only watching their kid, and their kid is nowhere near what you're watching in terms of, like, you see everything, but, like, you're going to miss some stuff, right? It's only human nature. There's two of you, right? So when there's six pairs in the field of play, and you have them where they kind of separate, or something happens where four go one way, two go the other, and it's a physical game. So for me, sometimes I like to, when you hear it, you're like, oh, okay, watch number 7. Okay, where's number 7? Like, they're helping you too, kind of like open your eyes. So, like, maybe they're seeing something. I don't necessarily engage the crowd. I wouldn't necessarily, for me personally, turn around and talk to them. I have had in games, whether it be age group or high school or college, where fans in between quarter, as I'm crossing, will say something. And, I try to keep my head down, because you don't know what are they going to do. You don't know if they're going to come yell at you. You don't know if it's going to be an altercation. And for me personally, if anyone that knows me, like, I'm not confrontational. That is not my forte, and I'd rather avoid it. However, like, I walk with my head down, and then they keep saying, excuse me. And so you finally look like, what do you need? And they'll, a lot of times they're asking, like, hey, what did this person do, or what happened here? Okay, now I have no problem, like, answering a quick question. And I can even say, like, hey, I have no problem talking to you after the game. Like, in between quarters, not appropriate for me to be talking to a fan, but I have no problem coming to you, or you coming up to me after. If it's not like a heated, you're threatening me or yelling at me that I'm terrible, we can have a decent discussion. Now, there are games where it is a very, very intense crowd, right? Your college athletes, and they're saying things that may not necessarily be ideal or appropriate. So at those times, like, it's never okay for a referee to turn around, and no matter where you are in the country, when those fans are verbally saying things that they shouldn't say, or inappropriate words or verbiage, I would get a side administrator and just say, like, hey, can you put someone over there to watch the fans, just to make sure that we're not crossing boundaries of discriminatory words or slang or anything like that, and keep it about the game. Now, if they're yelling about the game, I have no problem. Once they make it personal, for me, I would go get a side administrator to put someone there, regardless of an age group game or a higher level game. But for me personally, I would never turn around and address the fans. It's just not my thing.
Levon, probably some of the similar thoughts, but just your take on how you interact and deal with fans.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Tiff just said, and kind of similar to the coach, to the player aspect that I that I just talked about is like, you don't want to throw fuel on the fire. You don't want to engage when you don't need to engage. Yeah, there are times that the comments get out of hand. Anytime that you have either players, coaches, or fans not allowing you to focus on their game because of your conduct, then that becomes an issue. And Tiffany said it correctly: is you have to get the site administrator involved. We don't want referees talking directly to fans because, again, that's just going to create more animosity and problems. I think just regardless, it starts with us as referees. We have to remain professional at all times. And not to say that there aren't fans. There are great fans out there as well. Let's not forget, I don't want to just mention, I have made plenty of friends and families, and a couple of them, just come to 100%. Mind. Right. And I want to, if I can take a second to give a shout out, you have your Moguls in LA County, you have your Mabusi family in Orange County, your Gruel family in San Diego. These, there are great fans and parents out there who a lot of times will get in positive comments, and want to acknowledge them as well. And anytime a referee has a chance to answer a question, a legitimate question that a fan has, because many times we get that, right? There's new parents, especially at the younger age group. Hey, can you explain that call? Referees should answer that call. We don't want our referees to be robots out there, and that's not the expectation. But like Tiffany said, we don't want to engage when we don't have to, and especially if the fan is irate, you definitely don't want to engage at that time as well.
Let's talk a bit about making mistakes, because as we've covered, it is a difficult sport to officiate. Every referee at every sport has a time where they think, I missed that call. Levon, you do a lot of officiating on your own. You do a lot of education. Just walk us through how you handle processing a mistake on your own, and then also what you're telling other referees from an educational standpoint.
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to be honest with yourself. We want to get away from the referees who, and we educate this, right? We say, you miss a call. It's okay to admit that you missed a call, and when the coach asks and you say, hey, I missed that one. Hopefully I'll get it right the next time. What can they say? How bad could it get? But it's when you miss the call and it's a blatant miss of a call and you continue trying to defend it, that's where we get in trouble. So that's number one. Just admit that you could have possibly gotten it wrong, and then just try not to get it wrong the next time, right? You want to be consistent with yourself, but you want to just improve. So you have to accept that, first of all, you're never going to call a perfect game. You're going to make mistakes, but you don't want to have that mistake just haunt you throughout the game, because the game is just too difficult for one mistake to keep you bogged down. So you made a mistake, you knew you screwed up, try to move on from it, try to stay consistent with yourself. And if a coach asks, be truthful, and hopefully you don't have to admit that you've made plenty of mistakes. Hopefully it's just one time in that game.
Tiffany, we were talking about early on this idea of being a game manager. And so let's kind of get to the end of the game. The game ends, you and your fellow official talk through things, and we just talked about maybe mistakes, good things, bad things. What does a job well done feel like? Like, how is that conversation going, and what has to happen for you to feel like we did a good job on this game?
I think that's kind of like a twofold type of question. We do have headsets now for a lot of the game, a lot of your bigger games, and we're trying to get people are starting to buy their own because it's so much easier to be in that. So you're having that communication with your partner constantly through the game. The one thing to go back to, like, how do you feel like if you have a good game? For me, I self-analyze a lot. And the one thing I learned in my earlier career is you make a mistake, and the whole time then you're stressed out and you're thinking about that one mistake, and you're like, if the ball goes in, then I'm going to make it, I'm going to make that call. But it's like the same thing may or may not happen again. You just need to learn from it, but move on, rather than like focusing on it the entire rest of the game, because that's just going to mess you up the rest of the game, rather than, okay, like, I always tell referees, yes, was that a mistake? Should you have called an exclusion, not a contra foul? Or should you have done this versus 100% yes? But if you keep thinking about that for the next 25 minutes, like the whole game, you're never going to be clear in your head. You need to think about it now, put it in your memory bank and move on, right? So for me, how does it feel when you're talking, if you don't have the headsets, throughout the game, you're talking about different calls. Hey, what'd you see there? Like, I probably should have called that. What do you think from your angle? And a lot of times you're able to talk like as it's coming on of like, hey, what do you see there? Do you see the suit grab? Where's the hand? Where's this? Oh yeah, you should, you could do exclusion. Depending on who your partner, we're very vocal on the headsets. But if you don't have those headsets, you talk between quarters. And I think for me, I still like to self-evaluate on certain games, like, oh, that just didn't feel right. And, a lot of times we're talking about using, Huddle or any type of video service so that we can go back and look at certain games, because you don't have that where you're making those mistakes, or you make that, you're like, oh, that just didn't sit right. And the camera angle is somewhat different than how it felt in the time of the flow, whether it's the physicality or that sort of stuff. So for me, when you're like, hey, that was a good game, it's more like, was it a fun game? I think. And I think when your partner's like, that was really fun because it was exciting. The players played, the coaches coached, the referees refereed, and everyone, you're like, wow, that was actually a really fun game. Tough or easy, doesn't matter. You can still have like a really fun game that you're proud of yourself for, getting through without being like, oh man, I wish I would have done this differently, or I wish I would have called it or held my whistle, or I wish I would have called it a half second earlier. So there's just those things where I think for yourself as a referee, I'm always looking to grow. There's not many times where even when I've had a partner like, that was really great, it was the best game, and I'm like, really? Like, because there's a few things in my own personal mind that you may like, I wish I would have done that better, because you always want to be perfect, and obviously we're human, so that's not necessarily the most possible thing to do. And I wouldn't think that even if you think that you have like a great game, there's calls here they're going to go versus one team versus the other. So I don't think anyone can have a quote unquote perfect game from start to finish, but feeling like, all right, like that was a good game. I think it's more or less on the fun type of thing. Like that was a really fun job that we did.
We're talking about a referee's role here with Levon Dermendjian and Tiffany Spiritosanto. Just a couple of additional questions here. Levon, you're of course, and Tiffany too, into the recruitment of referees. You want new people to become a referee. Levon, I'll start with you. What makes for a good referee? Do you have to have played water polo? Do you have to have reffed another sport? Who are the type of people that end up doing well getting into water polo officiating?
I think without a doubt, former players are the ones that usually pick up really well. They are the ones that excel quicker. Because they just got out of playing. They know the game. Former coaches too are making the cross from coaching to reffing. They do really well as well. But I want to say our focus. One of our focuses is to get younger and former players to come and be referees. But I think there's a problem. There's a larger problem that we have, is that when we get into this coach-referee relationship, coach-fan relationship, everything feeds off of each other, right? So let's say the way the coach is with the referees is going to have a snowball effect, or that the fans are going to be an extension of what the coach is in that game, right? And that kind of goes with athletes too. So if you have a coach who is consistently on a referee showing disrespect or giving off the vibe that these referees are against us or they're out to get us, it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth, especially the players. And so now you have this, this icky feeling that these players have of like, oh, I don't want, referees are not the people I want to be joining. So, that's so important that, and I want to give another a shout out to Miguel Fuentes in Midwest. Anytime I see him and his Midwest team at a ODP championships or a regionals, their players every game come and shake the referee's hand and thanking them after a game. And it's just so great to see that kind of sportsmanship and coaches educating that. I wish we can have that everywhere. But I think the coaches play a huge part in our referee recruiting tool for former athletes. But yeah, going back to, are they the best? I would say former players just coming out of playing is our best bet to get them going and being very good at what we do.
Tiffany, to build off of that, what's your pitch to people to become a water polo referee, and what was the pitch that worked on you? So what was it about it that you said, okay, like I played at a high level college, I'll give this a try?
So I actually started officiating when I was a college athlete, and it was my mom who said, "Here's a way to go make some money." And I'm actually from the Inland Empire in California, and so I went to school in UC. I went to school in Orange County, and I drove from Orange County to the Inland Empire. So sometimes the high desert to the desert, I didn't know how to get involved. I didn't know that you could I mean, I knew obviously you could referee in Orange County. I just didn't know how to start. I was a freshman. I was a freshman in college, and it's expensive, whether you're on scholarship or not. It's just expensive, like, dorms, food, books. And so no one's really going to hire you with your schedule, your training schedule, the units that you have, unless you're going to go and try to wait tables or do something and work in the bookstore there. So my mom was kind of like, here, and my sister was in high school still. And so she talked to the one of the referees, and he gave they made their own business cards for like the SCAF Inland. And so she gave me a business card to a guy who actually refed when I refed my games when I was in high school. And so I emailed him or called him up, and he's like, okay. And so that's how I got started. But it took me probably about a year to 2 years to realize that I could actually join and come closer to home. So I would drive the hour plus just to make the cash. But for me, I was like, wow, I just refed for, these games, and I was getting these checks on the deck at the time for like $100. And to a young college kid, it was like, wow, this is awesome. So for me, that's how I kind of started, was just the extra money. And then I was recruited to coach with Scott Hinman, and to coach with his young girls, because he wanted someone that played at a high level to come and work with his like novice or frosh soft girls. And for me, I realized then I liked refereeing more than I liked coaching. And so, for me, it was great because I got all aspects, and I felt like that helped my mind as an athlete. I was able to referee, I was able to coach, and then I was able to play. And I realized, like, oh my God, that's why I got called for that. Or, oh, they're not going to call this thing that the girl that elbowed me in the face, because that was the first thing, but they're going to catch me going back after the girl because that's the second thing. And so for me, I think that helped elevate my game as a player. I'm short, I'm little, and I played against people like Robin Beauregard and Natalie Golda Benson. I wasn't playing with people who were 5 feet nothing, so for me, the mindset really helped me grow, and it was advantageous for me as an athlete. So that's how I started. And then it basically was like I just couldn't stop. And as a competitor, you're also competing against the referees, right? To want to advance your career, to want to get better games. And how do you do that? You watch film, you go and watch practices, you ask if you could go and be, can I come and run your practice? Or can I just go be a goal judge at one of the national events? And so you go there to expand. And so for me, when I talk to young athletes, I tell them like, hey, this will really help your game. Like this could help you, and it's extra cash. And who works around your schedule more than water polo, right? Because you can pick games that works for your schedule, or you can choose not to work, rather than you being scheduled to a 9 to 5 and having practice. Like I know I tried to work at Disneyland when California Adventure had just opened up when I was in college, and they said they'd work around my schedule. And all of a sudden season started, and they were like, yeah, no, that's not going to work for us. Peace out. Right. So I only worked there for a few days with my hands, ride operator status. But so for me, it's a very flexible schedule. Yes. Are you making the same hourly wage that you would make, if you worked a 10-hour day or an 8-hour day? You're working shorter hours, and depends on how long you want to do your shifts, but you're in control of your schedule. You're in control of what you do. You're in control of where you want to go, and you control that. So for me, what I tell these young college athletes is like, hey, you can do this, and here's some money, and hopefully start them on the right track at an early age.
And for those that don't know Southern California geography, to be willing to drive from Irvine to the IE to officiate high school water polo is true love of your craft. So that is an intense drive, even in no traffic times, let alone rush hour or whenever high school games were happening. Guys, as we're kind of wrapping this up here, I just want both of you to kind of answer this. And Levon, I'll start with you. Just anything else you want people to know about a referee's role as you see it, and their role in the water polo world at large?
I think we touched on most of it. What really bothers me is the misconceptions. I think there's another thing. the even exclusion count. I think you mentioned one where, people think that we want to be involved to make a call because we want to be, and that's rarely the case, if ever. And then the whole, we're trying to even out the exclusion ratio, or we're talking to one coach more, and then we don't have the opportunity to say something with the equal amount of time to the other. So that must mean that they're favoring one team or another. Just some of these misconceptions that I just think they're not very helpful. It's hurtful for referees, and just particularly, like, let's take, for example, the exclusion ratio. You're never going to get that. If there's teams that are playing different defenses, you're going to get different exclusion count. Yeah, once in a while you get lucky and get the exact same number, but it's so rare. It's not going to happen. If one team is running a press and another team is running a drop, of course you're going to have one more exclusions against one and not the other. So, I think just overall, majority of our referees want to go out there, want to be professional, want to give back to the sport they love. They want to make a little bit of extra money, and they just want to be a part of that game. And hopefully everybody understands that and can kind of take a deep breath sometimes when they get upset, and say, you know what, at least they're trying, they're being professional. They might not be making all the right calls, but we need referees in the game. This is not like basketball. We can call your own fouls, right? This is not pickup basketball. You need referees in water polo. And so hopefully, we can get more cohesiveness and working together with everybody on the pool deck.
And Tiffany, same question. Anything else you want people to know, or anything to kind of clear up misconceptions, that sort of thing?
We've had a referee school once a month since we've been shut down. And one of the questions that keeps coming up is, how do you deal with them not thinking that you're biased? And it's the question is, the fear is they think that you're biased because they do look at, as Levon said, the exclusion ratio, or they look at specific statistics. And it's when you're in that game, you're not necessarily, yes, are you aware of it? You should be aware, right? But if it's not there, you can't make it up. You can't make it up, because then you are inserting yourself in the game. And the best times when you've heard there's a national team coach on there. We were talking about a game 100 years ago, and I was like, I was your referee on that game. He's like, no, you weren't. He did not remember I was on the game. That is a win right there. When they don't know that you were the one on that game, that is a win, because he's a coach that remembers everything. And he did not remember that I was on the game until he went back to that film, and he's like, oh my God, I didn't even know it was you, right? And it's that's a win, right? Because he didn't think that I was biased. He didn't think that I was, making calls that weren't there, right? The mystery call no one wants, right? No one wants that mystery call. If it's there, great, right? So as referees, you are trying to be the most impartial person that there is. And it's human nature to think, oh, that referee doesn't like me, or that referee doesn't like this player. I was removed from a game. I got picked to do a championship game at women's seniors 100 years ago. But the girls, because in their semifinal, they got called for suit grab after suit grab after suit grab and up in Bakersfield. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I got selected for the game, and then I got pulled off. And I was like, what just happened? It's the coach was a friend of mine, not friend, but friendly, and basically said after the tournament, my girls, I just didn't want it in their heads because you called them for the suit grab, and I want them to be able to play normal, right? So I didn't take offense to that. If his girls were going to play differently because of the style that I referee, or however it is, but we could have that honest conversation. I didn't take offense to it. It was nothing that I could or couldn't do. That is my game. And if you don't like the game, there's nothing that I, you know what I mean? Unless I'm wrong, right? If I'm wrong, then I can make changes to grow. But if there's that perception that we're out to get people, we're out to prove a point, or we have a chip on our shoulder, we have a hard job to do. And the job is to keep it fair, and even the game that is there, right? You may have it where one team on paper is way better than the other team. But in that game, particularly within lane lines, you can't think about what team's ranked 1 and what team's ranked 8, right? You have to ref the game that's in that lane lines, that particular game. And so when you look back at it, it's we're not trying to be biased. We're not trying to make the underdog win. We are calling what is happening in that moment. And that's really hard when I might not know either team, right? But the coach knows their team, and the coach knows what their team is capable of doing, and what their center and the defender and their goalie and everyone's capable of doing, because they see them every single day. we're reffing what we see right then. And I don't think there is a bias. I think that if we come together as human beings, we're kind and we treat each other with respect, I think that the relationship between coaches, fans, athletes, referees can actually be a beautiful thing and work together to make this sport better, to make this sport what it should be. And a mutual thing. We would get more coaches to come. We would get more referees. And if we all became, we're all going to have different points of view. You see that on our Twitter feed when we post, what do you make the call? I love the high profile coaches jumping in, because I'm like, this shows these high profile coaches don't see eye to eye, and it's okay, but we're having these open discussions, whether we disagree with you or don't disagree with you, on how to make it better. Like, what is this call and why? And you get to see the angles like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Or, oh, that was a really good point. But if we can't bring that to the deck, and we can't bring that to the coaches and the referees, we're never going to grow where we should. I know that was really long-winded, but I'm very passionate about the relationship and the growth of our sport. And we can't grow if people are too scared to try because of how we're treated.
No, it's really good stuff, Tiffany. I mean, and you've worked a long time in pro sports too. We've seen it in a variety of sports that when the referees and the players and the coaches can connect more, there becomes a real admiration for each other. There's a classic video that circulates in the NBA all the time of Charles Barkley, like giving a bear hug to one of the referees that they've grown so fond of each other. I'm not sure you guys want bear hugs, but that's just a road that we could go down at some point here. Both of you sharing really good stuff. Last thing, Levon, if someone watches this and they want to get involved, they want to be a ref, what's the best way for them to reach out and get involved as a referee?
First things first, start off with your USA Water Polo membership. So if you log into your membership profile, you can upgrade your membership to a referee profile as well. And then depending on what checks, let's say if you're a coach, you probably have already done those administrative checks, like your safe sport, your concussion, your other things, your background screening. So it starts with your membership first, I would say. Take care of the administrative stuff, and then also keep in contact with your zone head referee. There's a list of zone head referees on our USA Water Polo website under members, and then if you go to the referee section under members, there's a list of zone head referees. Give them an email, say that you're interested, at least so that they have you on their radar, and also they can add you to their email list so that if there's any kind of opportunities, whether it's training, games, what have you, you can receive those emails. But those two, starting with your administrative stuff first, USA Water Polo member page, and then also connecting with your zone head referee is your best bet.
Excellent stuff, Levon and Tiffany, both part of the USA Water Polo referee department. Appreciate it. If at any point in a past broadcast I've been critical of one of your calls, I apologize now. I've now had a great opportunity to learn how difficult your jobs are, but I've also known that for a long time. So just kidding there. But appreciate you guys being here. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you both soon.
Thank you, Greg. Take care.